Welcome. This is my review of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, developed and published by Ubisoft. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is the 11th game in the main Assassin's Creed franchise. It's a franchise that probably should have been solidified by now into a firm form, but instead, Assassin's Creed just seems to be changing up the formula, once again with Origins, the game before this, and it feels like this is a brand new genre. But perhaps this has become a change too far. Before we begin with the game itself, just a reminder, if you enjoyed this review, consider subscribing, liking the video, even sharing it will help. It helps grow the channel and get these reviews out. Thank you. Now, as a small note, this is going to be a longer video, but I think we should be fully looking at a game to judge it, and in Assassin's Creed Odyssey's case, there's a lot here that we really should talk about. And if it sounds like I'm a little under the weather, yeah, I am. Sorry about that, but the show has to go on. Now, previously I reviewed Assassin's Creed Origin, and like I said, it's pretty clear that Odyssey has continued the idea and legacy of that game. But there was only a year between the release of Origins and Odyssey, which kind of affects the game in a variety of ways that we're going to have to get to. The graphics of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, though, are impressive. While many games do look good, there's a level of detail and design to Assassin's Creed Odyssey's conversations that just seems to be missing in most games. It's unreal. The conversation system just consistently looks great and helps build memorable scenes. The world itself is also quite beautiful, and with sprawling cities, there's actually also huge environments with fields, plains, and even forests outside of those cities, and it creates a more visually interesting location and experience for the players. Just roaming through the land to see what you can find is quite solid, though almost all main points of interest are labeled on the map, sadly. Though following the map is hardly the only way to see the entire Grecian countryside. And the world itself does become a problem as well. While there's a massive world here with a lot of variety, such as seeing the towns of Athens or Sparta, every town feels almost the same before long. This is a similar issue that Assassin's Creed 3 had, and truthfully, several Assassin's Creed games since then as well. There's a ton of cities here, at least 20 major cities, but so many of them feel like just another city you've seen before. Even Athens and Sparta, which should be really visually different, have major locations, but also just have multiple districts that feel like they were copied and pasted from the others. It feels like a cookie-cutter design to the map because I think it is, and it becomes tiresome after the third palace or standard home or leader's house that you've seen is used for a location for a quest. A similar problem comes from the enemies as well. Almost every group of enemies seems to be pulled from the same pool. The only difference becomes what outfit they're wearing. Athenian soldiers look like Spartans, but one is garbed in blue and one is covered in red. There's also pirates, merchants, and minor city-states as well, but again, the design of these characters barely seem to matter. They all just seem to be the same. They also fight quite similarly, which we'll talk about a bit later as well. Though I do want to call out one last thing about the enemies. We actually have some women in combat now. Some soldiers, mercenaries, and citizens are women, and they'll take up arms or just be walking around. Having a female main character is a huge thing, but also seeing women in battle is a positive change to this game, and I do want to praise Ubisoft for actually adding this to the game. This is what they said would be impossible back during Unity, but here, it's a better experience for it. And that leads us to the story. Now, in Assassin's Creed Origins, there was a linear story focused on Bayek. Players had minor choices, but overall the experience was going to be the same pretty much no matter what you did. Assassin's Creed Odyssey developed the story quite a bit more. This time we actually have two characters to choose from, Alexios and Cassandra, or really the male and female models. I obviously chose Cassandra from the footage, but having a choice is good, and it's only the first of many choices in the game. Now, a major emphasis of Odyssey has been to allow the player to roleplay, I would say, and I do actually mean roleplay. There's a wealth of choices in this game, and you can actually get different endings. If there's a pack of thieves, you can choose to kill them, threaten them, or just warn them. Again, it's not only one choice, but what makes this true role-playing is actually a lack of a morality system, at least that I could see. This is actually something that I feel most games don't understand. Having a morality system limits roleplay, especially when rewards are based on those choices. Instead, Assassin's Creed Odyssey allows players to play their character however they want. If you want to be a murderous titan for one conversation and kill someone, it doesn't lock out the ability to be a benevolent mercenary later, and another time you might want to impersonate a deity for someone. This is all well done and worth mentioning. It also helps that the characters will often refer to what you've done previously. When giving status reports, players will actually comment on their actions, and other characters will talk about previous exploits when meeting your character for the first time. Though sometimes it's not always clear what they're referring to exactly, I wouldn't change this at all because it creates a far stronger story and narrative just by this small change. And Ubisoft. This is Assassin's Creed at its very best. This is what you need to focus on. Immersive role playing without offering rewards for those actions. It's actually rarely done in games, and Odyssey does it extremely well. Now, the story in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is great, but admittedly it's a bit predictable. I am going to have to spoil a bit here to talk about the story, but this is kind of the first 5 hours. There's a lot more. At least 80% of the game is past this point, but I need to make some small points here. The beginning of our game is typical Assassin's Creed gameplay, where the player is just learning the abilities. And then the player is eventually sent out to kill a general known as the Wolf by a mysterious gentleman. From here, we actually eventually leave our island our player has called home for so long, and we take off sailing. We learn the name of the Wolf. And I don't want to mispronounce the name, but it is our character's father, and you're going to see some parts of this on the screen. Now, you have to earn the right to talk to your father through several meaningless quests, but eventually there's an interesting choice here. You actually don't have to kill your father. This is part of the ending that I was talking about, and the choice is made so early. I ended up killing him because, well, reasons, but I thought it was unavoidable. Choice does matter here. However, from this point, I feel like the surprises in Assassin's Creed Odyssey kind of stops. A mysterious stranger that has asked us to kill this person is a member of a cult, and who this group is in the series, really becomes quite obvious about a minute after meeting them. Even the leader of this group is equally obvious after meeting them in the game, and it's a shame because there's actually really good storytelling here, but there's a paper-thin attempt to hide any information in the game. Yet, I still feel invested in the main story because it's well told, beautifully animated, and wonderfully executed. At least the main story is. Side quests, on the other hand, range from hilarious, such as a lusty old woman trying to get her man in bed again, to run-of-the-mill. There's a vast number of them, but they eventually all seem to blur together and only a handful stand out. And some, such as this one, is kind of laughably bad. The only big issue I really have with the main story, though, is that you'll meet famous characters, but they are uninteresting. It feels like the game's just name-dropping them. You might meet Hippocrates, who is a doctor and has a single mission about him. But there's so many famous characters that appear in the game, and they just play out what feels like a small cameo to say, you may have heard of my name. The only character who seems to even have more than that is Socrates, but he only had a pair of scenes where he tosses out a little philosophy on our player and quickly moves on. Now, these are great and famous characters, but they're treated as just name-dropping by this game, compared to Assassin's Creed 2 with Leonardo da Vinci, who actually became a helpful friend. Still, the story is where Assassin's Creed Odyssey is at its strongest. These are minor complaints, but it's the gameplay that actually leads us to some problems. The biggest thing is that this is no longer an Assassin's Creed game that's pretending it has a strong tie to the original series of games. Instead, the game just flat out asks the player about his familiarity with RPGs. Now, this is a reference to, I think, modern RPGs like Witcher, not classic RPGs or JRPGs like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, but still, this is a massive shift in the genre of the game. And this isn't limited to the focus of the game, but the entire game feels more like an MMORPG. Though not exactly a multiplayer experience, it feels like the size, scope, and level of the game has become very similar to the huge amusement park style of games in the past. The biggest thing is that there's a wealth of content across a huge number of locations and areas, but at the same time, it's some of the most shallow content yet. The majorities of these quests are just going to some location, doing some minor action, and then returning to the quest giver. Those actions are often killing, finding an item, or talking to someone, not to mention many quests that are just open-ended tasks to kill X amount of a certain type of enemies. And while the word is still in the name, we get the classic idea of assassination here, but similar to Origins, we're forced to deal with level-based gameplay, and it removes much of the enjoyment of the classic idea of stealth and assassination by making it based on the idea of what level you are versus an opponent. While this did exist in Origins, it has only become a bigger issue in that normal enemies at the same level as your character might not be able to be killed in a single assassination attack. It's not even bosses or epic enemies anymore, but average rank and file soldiers may still have more health than you can remove. And before people can bring it up, yes, there are abilities that can assist or increase the damage of your assassination attacks with critical attacks, but these become a necessity for stealth-based gameplay rather than the ability for higher level enemies above what you can hit. Yet, with a level-based gameplay, we also have level-based gear. Each level increases the damage that you can do, however, the gear becomes a constant grind. If you move from level 30 to 31, it's pretty much time to swap out all the gear when you find new gear at this level. While there are a few legendary items that actually last more than one level, it seems that most of these items last probably about 2 levels, at least from what I've seen, and players will be able to replace them even with common gear 2 levels higher. With level-based gameplay as well, it also means enemies will level up. If you scout an area at level 33 and you see level 34 enemies, you might want to return when you're at level 35, but suddenly every enemy in that camp is now level 35. Come back later and they tend to match your player's level. Now, there are minimum and maximum levels for some enemies, but the game avoids players using this as a way to progress, as lower level quests and enemies will give less experience. So the game expects players to avoid out-leveling enemies, but here's the question: why? Not just why enemies level up, but why even have any of these systems? Why does your player need a level? And why then add gear based on top of that? And then why constantly have enemies level up with you? The fact is, there's not a strong reason for this type of level-based gameplay except to gate the player. And we'll have to wait a moment to really dive into why that exists, but it doesn't enhance the game and instead creates more of a treadmill for players to run at that they have to constantly chase if they want to progress. Consider this: if you kept everyone at the exact same level, never let the main player level up, you wouldn't have to worry about this, but instead you want to have the level number so that you feel that you're on this treadmill. Now, much of the gameplay of Odyssey was in Assassin's Creed Origins, but that doesn't mean there's no improvements in Odyssey. The horse AI really didn't work well in Assassin's Creed Origins. Having the ability for the horse to follow the road that seemed to break within seconds of using it was quite disappointing for Origins, but the good news is Assassin's Creed Odyssey's horse AI never broke for me, and I used it quite a bit. The horse also seemed to take lessons from Skyrim or The Witcher, and it's a blast to use off-road, even tackling huge mountains without any problems. This is again a great achievement in that I found myself calling for my horse immediately rather than even trying to run short distances of maybe 100 meters. There's also 2 modes for Assassin's Creed Odyssey's gameplay now. There's a guided mode and an exploratory system. The guided system will just tell the players where to go, what to do, pure hand-holding. However, the new system is the exploratory mode, which will often give the players a location and hints where a target is near there. From there, the player has to get close and then will be told to use their eagle to target the goal of the mission. From there, the player will actually get a similar experience, but the exploratory mode adds in an interesting twist that gives the player a chance to kind of experience the game rather than being led to where he has to go next. The series staple of allowing players to climb any object is also here, and it actually works well. Players can scale almost any building by just holding the up direction and the A button, and it's quite satisfying to scale huge statues, temples, or look down at targets, usually to dive down and try to assassinate someone from the air. There's also different levels of quests as well, with the main story quest, of course, being there. There's also side quests, bounties, and time missions. Though, like I mentioned, the quality of the quests varied, with the main story quests being the strongest. The side quest variants, they're the gold-colored quests. They aren't part of the main quest, but they are just a bit weaker, and everything else becomes almost a mess. Some quests are what I like to call 200-meter fetch quests. While many of these are bounty or time quests, some will appear in the side quest style as well. They amount to running about 200 meters, completing some minor action, interact, kill, or talk to someone, and then returning to the quest giver, and you get your reward. But 200 meters is barely far enough to call it a real quest, and the amount of experience given for these tasks is far higher than players might expect. Outside of the side quests, though, most of the quests in the game amount to what the Radiant quests were in Bethesda games, a line of quests that players can do endlessly that will always reappear. This isn't necessarily a problem for players, because you can always just skip it, so if they run out of scripted missions, players can experience the world as they want. There's also a brand new bounty system, and while this system was started in Assassin's Creed Origin with higher level mercenaries roaming around who would attack the player in sight, the experience has changed in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now there's actually a bounty system that's more like a notoriety system from Grand Theft Auto. The more chaos that the player is causing, the more attention mercenaries will give to the player. Now, this is set up to be similar to the Nemesis system of Shadow of Middle-earth, and it does a good job in generating new mercenaries to continue to harass the player at all times. Though there are a few problems with the system, many mercenaries really feel just the same. Where the Nemesis were called out for different traits of the mercenaries, the big problem are the mercenaries here are just using, minor special techniques, whether it be like a flame sword or poisons. They just become harassment to the player, but this is one of the few areas where the player can overlevel their enemies. When the player kills one of the mercenaries, another mercenary notification seems to appear on the screen most of the time, giving players a feeling of making almost no progress with that system. Just changing out a single merc for another with similar abilities, which is what is actually happening here. However, I do like what was attempted with the mercenary system and just want it to be pushed further. It's a sign that someone has finally attempted the Nemesis system besides Shadow of Middle-earth, and while it's not perfect yet, it is a step in the right direction and probably needs to be expanded on to be better. Of course, there needs to be a reason to earn notoriety, and a big part of this reason is that you can kill anyone in this game. You're no longer forced to really choose a side, but instead can assist any group or kill anyone. If a player wants to go on a full rampage in a town, they can, and there's the freedom to commit many crimes, mostly stealing, of course. Stealing from the enemy, slaughtering civilians, and general issues will cause the player's bounty to rise. And while they can pay off people to avoid this after they commit the crimes, the mercenaries bring kind of a spice to the game that's really not found anywhere else. Yet, the ability to kill anyone becomes also a bit of a pain. You can enter into a fight trying to assist one side and accidentally anger the other side, so you're going to be ending up killing both sides because that's how the game works. Though, the fact is, the player doesn't decide between the two sides, leaves them feeling a bit empty. Do you want to support Athens or Sparta? You actually can keep switching between these two groups, and without being forced to side with one of these two groups, players are just able to kill who they want, when they want, and it leads to lacking experience as the player's identity isn't as strong as in the previous game. There's also an idea that players can have conquest missions for certain areas. Each nation in the game is actually ruled by some group, and the player can actually weaken that nation's hold on the area, and another group will come in and try to take over. It causes these massive conquest battles, as you can see on the screen. At least one of these is part of the story missions, the one shown, but they become large melees, and while they work, there's not really a strong reason to keep fighting in these. It comes down to national identity, and the fact is the player doesn't have a connection, either to the nation of the groups ruling them or the group attacking them. There's no reputation board that the player has to build up. If you assist Athens in one battle, you can assist Sparta in the next one. No one seems to be paying attention to this fact at all. Though this is a major problem for the Conquest Missions, the combat in Assassin's Creed Odyssey doesn't fare much better. I've talked earlier about how all the enemies look the same, but they also fight the same. While the type of weapon that they're going to choose to use will matter to their attack patterns, every enemy is the same and ends up feeling the same. I use the same attack pattern throughout the game. You attack like 3 or 4 times, check to see if anyone's attacking you, dodge out of the way at the last moment to get a chance to deliver some more damage. There's a few super moves that can help damage your enemy, an ability that restores your health, a Spartan kick to knock a shield bearer down, or a bull charge just for fun. But these are the core of my attack patterns, and they continue to work for over 30 hours. There are a huge amount of combat choices. There's even like a parry command that was taught very early in the game, and I forgot. The problem is focusing on what works in combat is good enough for Odyssey. You can just repeat the same attacks for every single battle. Once I found a super move that delivered multiple attacks, even using the Spartan kick and the bull rush was unnecessary. And while I definitely could have tried to change up my combat style, there was no need to. I could try to make it more fun, but admittedly I had already found the perfect combat for me. Why am I changing it to make it fun when the game itself should have done that? Now, there's also a return to ship combat similar to Black Flag, and while I heavily enjoyed Black Flag's experience, the level system again appears here, and it's really not that fun. Enemies level up with you, but there's limited need to fight ship to ship unless someone spots you and challenges you. At the same time, fleeing enemies who are higher levels is really easy, and killing enemies at or below your level is similarly repetitive. There is an idea where you can actually recruit people to your ship, but this amounts to just another piece of equipment that doesn't change much outside of the ship combat, which wasn't interesting enough to dive into at a deep level. It's the level system that's making this uninteresting, with all the same problems as the normal combat. especially because everything rises to your level. And so far, well, what's the big problem with this? Nothing I've said is really that bad. I don't prefer the level based combat, but is that really a bad thing? Well, honestly, Odyssey is an enjoyable game. So, is there a big problem here? Yeah. Well, I kind of saved this for last. I know I've gone on quite a bit, but I wanted people to understand the entire game before I got to the deeper issues at play here. As you play the game, there are times when there are huge level gaps between levels for the main story missions. There were at least 2 points I can point out where I had a 4 level gap and a 6 level gap between levels, which means that players are supposed to go do something else. Besides, some missions are actually kind of impossible, such as a main story mission when the player is told to take down an island country or find this person. I did everything possible on that island and was left with a third of their nation's power. I couldn't even start the takeover. There's also another point where the character is just told to get 15,000 gold. Yet, this mission, as you go on with it, you literally save this person's brother, get a valuable trinket for her, and more, and yet she still wants 15,000 gold for information. Saving her actual brother, flesh and blood, wasn't a big enough achievement for this, and what I was trying to ask for wasn't some valuable item. This was just some minor information about my person, not, major information for them. What Assassin's Creed has become is just a series of treadmills for you, and points where the game just wants you to experience everything that it has to offer. This is everything the player has already been experiencing, but you're kind of locked off from the interesting storylines, the fun missions, and the progress you want to make just to get some arbitrary value of experience. It's a similar thing that Origins did. This is done to extend the length of the game, of course, and given a methodical approach of trying to do everything, there's at least 50 to maybe even 100 hours to accomplish everything that Assassin's Creed Odyssey can offer you. But by locking off good content for average content, Assassin's Creed Odyssey doesn't value the player's time and just wants them to play more. This is the difference between Fallout 4 with their pointless Radiant quests and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Assassin's Creed Odyssey has Radiant quests that you can ignore, but you will do so at your own risk. You can skip these short quests that give you a ton of experience, but you will ultimately have to go and farm experience from somewhere else. There are even more repetitive tasks here, but there's this idea that you can kill off the cultists that I mentioned, but it just becomes more busy work. There's not even direct paths, but instead calls to just go explore the certain area and hope you run into information about the cultists. Just a way to spend more time with this game. And here's the problem with this system for me. This isn't Ubisoft making a mistake with progression or just putting stuff too high level. I can actually say this because, well, it's that time in my review. We have to talk about microtransactions. Now, I feel like Assassin's Creed Odyssey's microtransactions are egregious. There are many horse, ship, and crew microtransactions that are unrealistic, and even using one of them on my horse, it really doesn't look great. But okay. The problem is, there are microtransactions to unlock maps of where certain items are. There's also double experience microtransactions. As if they knew they had to have microtransactions, so they made a worse experience system so players would want to buy this microtransaction, or that they knew the game had a problem with progression, but rather than fix the issue, they charged $10 for the microtransactions. This isn't trying to find a conspiracy. This is a problem with the game design. The game becomes a grindy mess for the experience, and this is a problem that Origins also had, so why wasn't it fixed this time? Rather than trying to improve the system with the sequel, Odyssey seems to have turned it so that they can even push more microtransactions. And here's the thing. Odyssey is a good game for the first 5 to 10 hours. If this was just a 20 to 30 hour game without forced side content, players would probably have loved this. But then it would have been a simple $60 enjoyable game. And instead, if we can make it into a slog, then maybe players will pay the extra $10, and who knows, maybe we can get $70 or $80 with all these purchases. Not to mention DLC and season passes. Oh boy. But the thing is, this is great for Ubisoft and bad for the consumer, and it's something that I feel that we really shouldn't be supporting. Instead of a tight 30-hour game, we get a 50-hour game of content, but it's just the same content over and over. The great story that could be told in 30 hours is stretched out more because the players have to do other stuff that isn't as good. And as such, they get to play more and more and get tempted to buy maybe some more of that DLC. Now, I will be honest about this. I didn't finish Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I played this game for about 30 hours, and what I found novel and interesting in the first 5 hours, became routine by the 20-hour mark, and I found myself starting to dislike this game. Let me explain why. There's almost a numb feeling that creeps into the game where you just mindlessly play the content so you hopefully can get to the next major part of the game that might have a piece of the story that you're actually craving. It's a numb feeling that I remember from playing MMORPGs with their mindless content to keep you addicted to the game and paying that monthly subscription. But we are now seeing this style of gameplay from single-player games. Now, part of this could be I was playing it from beginning to end in, a couple weeks, but having played through Origins previously, I think that might have changed my opinion. It's possible that without having played Origins and experiencing another 50 hours of the same style, I might have enjoyed this game more, but ultimately I think something has gone wrong with the series. I think part of this issue is having these ultra-large game worlds drop every year, and when you're considering the other Ubisoft projects like Far Cry, Watch Dogs, Ghost Recon, and more, I think there's a problem with the pace that the studios are putting out games. The fact is, it's bringing everything down to a weaker baseline just to pump out more games. Having to create, 50 to 100 hours of new content with a whole new world, new quests, new characters, and more have to be taking a toll on these developers. And I'm not even just talking crunch, but just the inspiration. Odyssey has a ton of cookie-cutter world-building, repetitive quests, weaker progression with uninspired combat. This is all pieces of systems that we've seen previously, and while it is still high quality in some areas, it doesn't make for a stronger game, especially when so many corners have to be cut to hit the deadlines. It feels that Ubisoft is experimenting with what they can get away with to turn over games quicker. Far Cry Primal reused a map. Odyssey is mostly just a coat of paint on Origins with mass-produced average quests, and, Ghost Recon's, that didn't work on its own. Yet, there's nothing truly bad about Odyssey. It's not a broken game, it's not an awful experience. There's nothing painful or frustrating about it. It's just lulling the player into repetitive actions to progress a story that they want to get to. But there are, of course, good moments. The graphics are top-notch still, the story is very solid when it's there, and it's a good experience. But this is also the problem that MMORPGs had to tackle. This is a very long game designed to be even longer to take up more time. The reason for this is, of course, debatable, and while it might sound like this is due to the belief that players want longer games, even if they aren't strong experiences. But I just don't think that's it. Instead, I believe we have the same idea of an MMORPG, like I've said, where the goal is to get people to stick around to keep giving money to the MMORPG maker. For Assassin's Creed Odyssey, this is more of an attempt to squeeze more time out of players to keep them in the ecosystem in the hopes that they might visit the DLC store and pick up a few microtransactions. It's just not a strong experience because of that. Ultimately, I am giving Assassin's Creed Odyssey a 2.5 out of 5. Now, this is not a recommendation, but it's also not a recommendation. This is a pure fence sitting for me. It's a fun game in bursts, but there's a huge amount of content and gameplay if you value that. It's just not a great experience and not one that will be consistently strong. Of course, part of the score is assuming that you played Assassin's Creed Origins. I've heard those that started with Odyssey and never played Origins still find this game enjoyable, and even those who played this and then went to Origins found that one weak. Though, I don't think there's a reason necessarily to skip Origins to play this game. They're both about equal in that aspect. Though, Ubisoft has said that they are taking a break from the Assassin's Creed games for a year, which is why 2019 didn't have a release. Though, I honestly hope that they're doing it for the right reason, both to fix many of these flaws and try to produce a game worthy of being played, rather than trying to find new ways to get players to spend even more money on average gameplay. I know they just had a big kerfluffle from Ghost Recon, and I'm hoping they're taking the right lesson away from that. Now, I know I've gone on quite a bit longer than normal, but I wanted to examine and explain what's going on with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's a problem with these open-world games, which are massive, and why it's becoming problematic as a style of game. Now, if you have enjoyed this, consider subscribing, and if you are hearing this already, you clearly must have an opinion on this video. Feel free to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, depending on what you really think of this video, and of course, share this with anyone you want, especially on social media. I'd appreciate that. Next up, we're going to have our first Sonic series, the OG. That's the original game, of course, Sonic the Hedgehog 1991. So stay tuned for that. I'm also going to pop up 2 videos that are important here. We have Assassin's Creed Origins, so if you want to hear what I think of that, and I'm also going to pop up my awards for best game I reviewed last year, which the top honor was actually given to a rather amazing open world game. Check that out as well. Until then, I'm King Link, and thanks for watching.